Cant Review print speaking to the blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @CuneReview, that is @CuneReview. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@cunereview.com, that is INFORMATION@CuneReview.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
This is from the Herald on Wednesday the 10th of May 2023. This is from the news section. The headline reads, Derek MACKAY trying to contribute to society after text scandal. This article is by David Ball. Shamed former SNP Finance Secretary Derek MACKAY has insisted he is contributing to society 3 years after quitting the government after sending text messages to a teenage boy. Miss MACKAY, who took £130,000 of public money in wages and resettlement grants after quitting his top job, was spotted at the All Energy Conference in Glasgow. He resigned from the Cabinet on eve of the budget in February 2020 after the Scottish Sun reported he had pestered a 16-year-old schoolboy with unwanted texts. Mr MACKAY, who had been tipped as a future First Minister, said he took full responsibility for his actions and he had behaved foolishly. The former Renfrewshire MSP has set up a consultancy firm, Loughlin Associates, after leaving office, when he continued to be paid as an MSP until the 2022 Holyrood election. In September last year, the disgraced former SNP minister evaded the media after giving evidence to a Holyrood committee on the ferry scandal. Speaking at the SCC, Mr MACKAY told The Sun that he acknowledged discomfort may have been caused by what happened. He said, I think it is clear I resigned, left public office, and now I'm getting on with my life. I have apologised before and I apologise again. I apologise publicly. Asked why he was at the event, Mr MACKAY said, because I am working, contributing to society, and this is about renewables, that's why I'm here today. I've apologised for any discomfort that caused, and I'm just trying to get on with my life like everyone else is. The father of two, who was 42 at the time of his resignation, said, I apologise unreservedly to the individual involved and his family. I spoke last night with the First Minister and tendered my resignation with immediate effect. Serving in government has been a huge privilege, and I'm so sorry to have let colleagues and supporters down. Despite never being seen at the Parliament again, Mr MACKAY continues to draw a basic MSP's salary of £64,470 while sitting as an independent. He also received an automatic grant of £11,945, the equivalent of 3 months' cabinet salary, for loss of ministerial office. After leaving Parliament in spring 2021, Mr MACKAY also received an automatic resettlement grant of £53,725 because he had served 10 years as an MSP. That article was by David Ball. This is from the Herald on Wednesday the 10th of May 2023. This is from the news section. The headline reads, Ferguson Marine to go back into private ownership. This article is by Martin Williams. Ministers have a plan to denationalise the shipyard firm at the centre of Scotland's ferry fiasco. It has emerged. Neil Gray, Cabinet Secretary for Wellbeing, Economy, Fair Work and Energy, has confirmed that there is an intention for taxpayer-supported Ferguson Marine to be placed back into private ownership. Ferguson Marine was taken over by the Scottish Government 4 years ago after its financial collapse under the control of tycoon businessman Jim McCall, as a row erupted over long delays and mounting costs over the delivery of 2 lifeline ferries. Glensannox and Hull 802 were due online in the first half of 2018 when Ferguson Marine was under the control of Mr McCall, with one initially to serve Arran and the other to serve the Sky Triangle routes to North Uist and Harris, but they are at least 5 years late. The last estimates suggested the cost of delivery could have more than quadrupled from the original £97 million cost. Mr Gray confirmed the Scottish Government's intentions when asked what he thought the future holds for the yard. He said, "We hope that Ferguson Marine can continue to make progress to being a commercially successful yard. That was the intention of saving the last commercial yard on the Clyde, to ensure that we protected jobs so that we can protect the manufacturing base that is there and the traditions of Scottish manufacturing. Clearly, there are challenges at Ferguson's that is well documented, but we continue to work with the management and the workforce to ensure that the two vessels are delivered as quickly as possible, and then there is opportunity for Ferguson's to bid for further work and make itself commercially successful." He was asked by Shadow Transport Minister Graham Simpson at the Scottish Parliament's Economy and Fair Work Committee if it was the intention to return Ferguson Marine to the private sector. Mr Gray responded, "Yes. Obviously, the better Ferguson is performing, the more likely it is that it's going to return to private ownership. We'll continue. If there are interested parties coming forward who will talk to government or our agencies, then clearly we will take the interest seriously and do what we can to ensure that the yard is returned as a commercial going concern into private ownership as quickly as possible." It comes after Scotland's public spending auditors have said there remains doubts over the long-term future of the shipyard firm because of a lack of a business plan. Audit Scotland has said questions remain despite attempts by new management to map out long-term future beyond the delivery of the two ferries. Nationalised Ferguson Marine has previously responded to concerns over its status as a going concern by insisting there is a strong future for the business. Despite its last annual financial review for 2021 to 2022 admitting there was significant doubt over its ability to continue as a going concern over questions over future funding. The Board of Directors went on to say that they were working with the Scottish Government to continue to develop a strategy and processes to deliver a sustainable business model which will secure the long-term position of the company. The Scottish Government, in response to concerns, said its priorities were to complete the ferries and secure the yard's future, while the Deputy First Minister said that ministers remained committed to do all that we can to help achieve a prosperous future for the yard. But Auditor General Stephen Boyle has said it is premature to say that the beleaguered shipyard has a future and is safe. Mr Simpson said there remained questions on how privatisation would happen. His admission that there has been challenges is quite the understatement. The woeful and ongoing failure to deliver lifeline ferries makes the prospects of finding a buyer much harder, he said. The SNP government must now work with the yard to get it into a position where it can compete for other work and make it fit for sale. That is undoubtedly going to need even more public money, so ministers should spell out how much more they are prepared to spend on the yard. Continued concerns over Ferguson's future came as it emerged a new round of bonuses were being made to its directors, despite an ongoing furore over the failure to deliver the two ferries. Ministers confirmed that a new round of bonuses amounting to £47,000 is being made to Ferguson Marine directors this year, despite the ongoing furore over the failure to deliver the two long-delayed ferries. Ministers say that further bonuses are legally required to be made for the year 2022 to 2023, despite concerns over £87,000 paid to executives at the ferry fiasco firm in 2021-2022. This brings the total level of bonuses due to be paid out over 2 years at £134,218. Direct capital spending on the two lifeline ferries hit £61.1 million in the last financial year alone, but the budget for Ferguson Marine was just £35.9 million, meaning there is an overspend of £25.2 million. In 2021-2022, ministers approved £115.1 million in spending on Ferguson Marine, more than twice the planned budget. Analysis of the money trail based on the Scottish Government's own accounting and audits revealed that the cost to the taxpayer of supporting Ferguson Marine both before and after it forced its nationalisation has soared to more than £450 million. The article was by Martin Williams. This is from the Herald on Wednesday the 10th of May 2023. This is from the news section. The headline reads, USAF, SNP can stop Labour lurching to the right and hung Parliament. This article is by David Ball. Humza Yousaf has insisted the SNP can put a brake on Labour lurching to the right if the party holds the balance of power in a hung Parliament at Westminster. Yesterday, UK Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer ruled out a coalition with the SNP over fundamental differences on independence. Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar insisted his colleagues at Westminster would reject any coalition or deal with the SNP. He said, no ifs, no buts, no deals with the SNP. But the Labour leader refused to rule out working with the Lib Dems if he needed to, in order to become the next Prime Minister. But the First Minister said the reality if Labour required a number to form a government could see them being more open about working with the SNP. Mr Yousaf also stressed that his party would be prepared to cooperate with Labour in a hung Parliament, but said the SNP would insist that Sir Keir moves back towards a more progressive agenda. Speaking to LBC Radio in Glasgow, the FM said, I think what is said in the midst of an election campaign is very different to the real politics once the results come in. We are absolutely determined to work with other parties to make sure we lock out the Tories. The First Minister said that it's very clear to me that Labour are lurching to the right, pointing to the party confirm it will not undo controversial anti-protest legislation that has been criticised by the UN. He added, look at the recent announcements around the fact that the Labour Party, if they do get into government, won't unpick legislation that is there to not facilitate protests, to stop lawful and peaceful protests from going ahead. So we will make sure that we ensure that the Labour Party go back to where they should be in terms of the progressive agenda. What we will also make sure we'll do in the event of a hung Parliament, which is a very real prospect, is we are prepared to cooperate with Labour, but of course we have demands for it. There will be a price for it. We can see already that there's a possibility of a potential hung Parliament so Scotland could hold the balance of power. The article was by David Ball.
This is from the Herald on Thursday the 11th of May 2023 from the news section. Terrible food price increases reveal fundamental flaws. This article is written by Christy Dorsey. The factors driving the surge in supermarket prices are numerous and interlinked. The war in Ukraine, which has crippled grain exports from that country and triggered a surge in energy prices. Brexit, which left perishable produce vulnerable to border delays while also slashing the number of seasonal workers available to grow and harvest domestic crops. Rising labour costs as workers attempt to keep wages within touching distance of inflation. The strain on supply chains that came to the fore during the pandemic, and widespread crop failures in North Africa and Southern Europe, leading to a shortage of fruit and vegetables in the UK earlier this year. But underlying all of that, Martin Kennedy has identified another culprit best described as complacency. We take it for granted, he said. We assume it's going to be on the shelf and that it's going to be cheap. As the president of the National Farmers Union, NFU, in Scotland, Mr Kennedy is naturally a fierce advocate of produce from the UK, which accounts for 60% of all food and drink consumed here. He warns that threats to indigenous production endanger not only the agricultural sector, which directly employs 67,000 people in Scotland, but also puts all consumers at risk of being held to ransom with food. People are saying, It's a terrible price. It's an awful price. But I think that comes back to what are our values. I completely understand that for those who are on extremely low incomes, it is difficult, but that's where the government should intervene. Average spending on food in the UK is now equal to about 12% of household income, Mr. Kennedy said, up from less than 9% a couple of years ago. However, that is still the lowest in Europe and the third lowest in the world. If that goes up to 14%, you might think that's quite high, and there is talk that the figure might go up to 14%, but it would still be 5 percentage points behind France, he said. In addition to the question of values, there are also food security concerns as the drive-by supermarkets keep shelf prices down has suppressed farm gate prices to the point that some have given up growing crops that fail to make any profit. Mr. Kennedy maintains that efforts to keep food cheap are not sustainable. It can be done, but it will only happen for a limited period of time because if we continue to reduce our ability to produce here, then we will completely be more reliant on importing, and right now that is not so easy, he said. Food is starting to get tight right across the globe. We've gone from 7 billion to 8 billion people in the space of 11 years. That's going to go up to 9 billion before too long. Domestic production is challenged as well as costs have gone through the roof. In just one of many examples, an NFU Scotland member with a cold store for potatoes saw his electricity bill jump from £140,000 to £800,000 per year. Labour shortages are another major constraint, and there are fears this season could see a repeat of last year, when fruit and vegetable crops rotted in fields because of a lack of workers to harvest them. The shortage of labour has not really eased at all, said Sian Saba, a director at Brightwork, the largest supplier of staff for the food and drink sector in Scotland. In food production, we have seen a little bit of slackening, sadly due to the redundancies in other sectors, but nothing significant enough to fill the gaps that have been left since Brexit. That has not been the case on the agricultural side, because those jobs are the ones that locals definitely don't want to do. On the import side, stricter border controls in the wake of Brexit have in some cases made the UK the last market of choice for European exporters who can trade more seamlessly within other parts of the economic bloc. It is an additional hurdle in a supply chain network already beset by constraints. Nowhere is the need for the supply chain audit and supply chain resilience clearer than in the food industry, says Oliver Chapman, founder and chief executive of supply chain management specialist OCI. A report last year for the Centre for Economic Performance found that Brexit was contributing to higher food costs in the UK even before the latest surge in prices. Researchers estimated a 6% increase during the 2 years to the end of 2021, with products such as fresh pork, tomatoes and jams that come mainly from the EU experiencing the largest price increases. Stuart McCallum, head of food and drink at accountancy firm RSM, said the UK's heavy reliance on food imports has in addition left it exposed to exchange rates, with a relative weakness of sterling against euro and the dollar adding to inflationary pressures. A further Brexit differential has been the UK government's response to the energy crisis relative to its counterparts on the continent. It is interesting when you see that inflation in Europe is lower comparatively to the UK, Mr. McCallum said. What's happened in Europe is that some of the governments, particularly France, took more of the blow in supporting the economy with the mitigation of higher energy prices. The UK is looking the outlier in how quickly inflation is coming down, and also the comparative levels of inflation. But that again is political choices in terms of how Europe reacted to what was a massive shock for the consumer and businesses in general. That article was written by Christy Dorsey. This is from the Herald on Thursday the 11th of May 2023, from the news section. Death of resident who drank cleaning fluid, sees care home fined. This article is written by Gabriel MACKAY. A care home has been fined £90,000 after a vulnerable resident died by drinking cleaning liquid that had been left in his room. David Fife, 90, was a resident at Tyne-y-Mearn residential home in Dundee when he was placed in temporary isolation, having tested positive for COVID-19. Mr. Fife had dementia and was unable to administer his own medication. On the final day of this isolation period, on the 27th of May 2020, Mr. Fife came to his door clutching his chest and stated that he had chest pain. Staff saw a paper cup with green residue on the table next to an unlabelled screw-top spray bottle of cleaning sanitizer, still with a lid on. The paper cup had a green residue in the bottom, which was the same colour as the cleaning sanitizer. Mr. Fife was taken to hospital and, following a gradual deterioration in his condition, died on the 31st of May 2020 at midnight. Tyne-y-Mearn Limited, who run Tyne-y-Mearn Residential Home, pled guilty to a health and safety at work breach committed between the 20th of March and the 1st of June 2020. The Angus Council investigation found that the infection control plan did not consider the hazard to Mr. Fife by storing chemicals in his room. The infection control plan in place for him stated that cleaning products used in the room were to be stored on top of the bathroom cabinet. While clinical wipes would have been staff's preferred option, supply issues associated with a pandemic made this unfeasible, and so the resilience plan was altered to include Sterigerm cleaning sanitizer. Speaking after the sentences, Debbie Carroll, who leads on health and safety investigations for the COPFS, said, "The death of David Fife could have been prevented if Tyne-y-Mearn Limited had taken the reasonably practical preventative measure of ensuring that residents were not exposed to the risk of hazardous cleaning chemicals. Their failure to adequately assess the risks posed to residents by the storage of cleaning sanitizer in their rooms had fatal consequences." This prosecution serves to highlight the need for all care homes to protect their residents and remind them that they will be held accountable if they fail to do so. Following the incident, locked boxes were placed outside residents' rooms and contain everything a person with COVID or suspected COVID needs. The home now has access to wipes, so the use of Sterigerm is no longer required. That article was written by Gabriel MACKAY. This is from the Herald on Thursday the 11th of May 2023, from the news section. Illegal killing blamed as new concerns surface over the hen harrier. This article is written by Martin Williams. Illegal killing is leading to survival rates of a rare bird species in Scotland becoming unusually low, with birds typically surviving just 4 months after fledging. The Royal Society for the Protection of Birds has raised concerns about the future of hen harriers, which are on the red list of birds of conservation concern, as their number are so scarce and are legally protected. Scotland has been the species' UK stronghold, with about 70 to 80% of the UK breeding population of hen harriers here, mostly found in Orkney and the Hebrides. But the new results of an RSP-backed survey tracking 148 birds between 2014 and 2020, with 86 in Scotland, found that just 17 survived. The hen harrier's lifespan is typically 8 years. It believes that 49 of the deaths were due to illegal killing, with 6 definitely identified as shot. The RSPB analysis identified hotspots for illegal killing in the central and eastern Highlands of Scotland and northern England. The RSPB in Scotland is now to produce the evidence to ministers considering a draft wildlife management and muir-burn bill, saying that the illegal killing of hen harriers and other birds of prey has no place in the nature and climate emergency and must end. It proposes a new licensing scheme for the killing or taking of certain birds, but initially red grouse only. It will also further regulate or even ban the use of certain wildlife traps. The RSP scientists analysed the data and looked at survival rates, causes of death whether natural or through illegal killing, and associations between mortality and land managed for grouse shooting. The authors discovered that individuals tracked by the project were typically living just 121 days after fledging. The study says that the risk of dying as a result of illegal killing increased significantly as hen harriers spent more time on areas managed for grouse shooting. It found that just 14% of the male birds and 30% of the females survived beyond 1 year. As many as 75% died between the ages of 1 and 2 years. The authors found multiple strands of compelling evidence that illegal killing is associated with land management for grouse shooting. The analysis found that 10% increase in grouse moor use by the birds was associated with a 43% increase in the death rates. The RSPB said that the estimate 460 breeding hen harrier pairs in a 2016 national survey is just a third of the estimated population size that habitat in Scotland could support. Duncan Orr Ewing, Head of Species and Land Management at RSPB Scotland, said, "This study reinforces the devastating impact that illegal killing is having on our hen harrier population, how strongly it is associated with grouse moors, and why urgent changes are needed to bring this to an end. There should be 3 times as many breeding pairs of hen harriers in Scotland than we currently have." Thankfully, the Scottish Government has undertaken an independent review of the evidence and is now taking action. It is proposed to licence grouse shooting with sanctions, including the removal of the right to shoot grouse where wildlife crimes are confirmed, and to provide a meaningful deterrent to wildlife crime. One example of many incidents recorded as part of the study was Rannoch, a young female hen harrier who fledged from a Perthshire nest in July 2017. Her remains were recovered in May 2019 on a Perthshire grouse moor. She had been caught in an illegally set spring trap and died what the RSP said was an agonising death. Mr. Orr Ewing said, "We cannot have more of our precious hen harriers being killed in such a way. This study is a crucial piece of evidence in helping to secure them a better future." Hen harriers are described by the RSPB as the most intensively persecuted UK bird of prey. According to conservationists, during the 19th century, the hen harriers were eradicated on mainland Scotland due to the expansion of game hunting estates. The Scottish Wildlife Trust said that despite the best efforts of changing legislation to protect the species and the decline of game estates, this relationship remains tumultuous, leading to illegal persecution of the hen harrier. Measuring 44 to 52 centimetres long and with a wingspan of 100 to 120 centimetres, they mainly eat small birds and mammals. Males are a pale grey colour, females and young birds are brown, with a white rump and a long barred tail, which give them the name ringtail. They fly with wings held in a shallow V, gliding low in search of food. Mark Tennant, chairman of the Scottish Land and Estates, said, "Estates play a vital role in encouraging raptors to flourish, including through the recent Heads Up for Harriers project, which saw 28 estates participate, and the South of Scotland Golden Eagle project, where 90% of translocated chicks have come from grouse moors." Any persecution of hen harriers and any form of wildlife crime generally is abhorrent, and our members are committed to assisting the government and police in this area. In this regard, we recognise the official statistics published by the Scottish Government in its annual wildlife crime report, with the most recent report released last month confirming that offences against birds of prey are at historically low levels, with 12 offences recorded in 2020 to 2021. He raised concerns around the transparency and interpretation of the tag data, adding, RSPB Scotland has not provided the data it is using for this latest report to partners, and this lack of cooperation undermines a collective effort to tackle raptor crime. He said there are different reasons why tags stop transmitting, not only persecution, and that it is well established that there is a high natural mortality rate for hen harriers in their first year, with the weather, fox and bird attacks and prey availability all playing a part. That article was written by Martin Williams.
From the Herald Scotland, Saturday the 13th of May 2023, from the politics section. Brian Taylor, forget friendly coalitions, this is raw, brutal politics, by columnist Brian Taylor. Ample talk this week about cross-party cooperation, even coalition, almost all of it spurious and inane. The present sound and fury arise, of course, from two factors: the English local elections from the very recent past, and the UK general election, which is a spectre yet to come. I understand, sympathise even. Politicians are under stress much of the time. Impending elections tend to leave them frenzied. How would you like it if you were constantly reminded that your job depends upon the whim of an electorate swayed by personal animus and uncontrollable events? But even accepting that, the volume of exchanges this week was in direct contrast to the substance of the discourse and the engagement of the people. Again, I comprehend. This week we endured a further rise in interest rates, but we were invited by the Chancellor to rejoice at the forecast that recession can be avoided. Hip hip! Nah, let it go. Our people are already fretting and anxious, as are our political leaders. They all know, that overweening promises will not cut it, that the state of the economy demands spending constraint or tax hikes, or, quite probably, both. From Westminster and Holyrood, therefore, we hear talk of tough decisions to come, with tough consequences, no doubt, for our people. Yet they also know that elections are not commonly won with the imitations of Reverend I. M. Jolly, and so our leaders heap vituperation upon each other, competing in rhetoric and rancour while simultaneously offering salvation. Which is where the cooperation talk comes in. Previously, Douglas Ross, the Scottish Conservative leader, suggested collaborative tactical voting to unseat nationalists. That found few takers. Now we have Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, firmly ruling out any post-election deal with the SNP, while gently sidestepping the prospect of a pact with the Liberal Democrats. That, he said, was a hypothetical question. Labour went further. Ian Murray is the rather talented Shadow Scottish Secretary, albeit sitting in his party's sole representative from north of the border, alone and palely loitering. He tried to concoct the prospect that Rishi Sunak might turn to a grubby deal with Humza Yousaf's SNP, driven by his desperation to stay in power. Now Mr Murray knows that Unionist Sunak and Nationalist Yousaf are diametrically opposites. Indeed, at Holyrood, Mr Yousaf said his objective was to get rid of the Tories forever. How? Scottish independence, of course. So what is going on beneath these bogus competing claims of putative future pacts? In practice, our leaders are pursuing confrontation rather than cooperation. They're trying to define the contest to come, rough-hewing it to their own ends. Consider the SNP. They have a fundamental problem with Westminster elections. By dint of simple arithmetic, a party which only contests Scottish seats cannot win overall power in the Commons. They have surmounted that in the past through a twin offer: to stand up ineluctably for Scottish interests, and to provide a vehicle for protest against London rule. Now they are offering to cooperate with others in order to isolate and oust the governing Tories. They use that offer as a proxy for UK governance, which they cannot attain. Plus, Of course, they set out their own aims, reversing Brexit as far as possible and granting Holyrood the power to stage Indy Ref 2. The strategy has another advantage for the nationalists. It helps them depict the contest as a choice between the independents and the Union, hoping that this polarised conflict will sway opinion in their direction and away from Labour. Douglas Ross was seeking to do much the same from the other side by positioning the need to focus upon ousting nationalists. Labour has a very difficult problem. Yes, they perform splendidly in the English locals, but success in Swindon does not translate into triumph in Stirling. The Scottish body politic remains distinct, yet Labour may need perhaps around 20 Scottish seats to reverse the UK majority defended by the Tories. It cannot afford to allow the discourse in Scotland to be centred largely upon the Constitution. It wants folk to focus on getting short of the Tories. Hence, the Scottish Labour leader Anna Sawar invited the First Minister to choose between a Labour or Conservative UK government. Mr Yousaf replied that he opted for Scottish independence, which he presumed would involve the permanent obliteration of the Tories. Well, maybe so. Either way, be clear what is happening. Mr Sawar loses one polarisation, Labour v Tory. Mr Yousaf replies with another, the Union v Independence. In order to do so, the First Minister needs to marginalise Scottish Labour, decrying them as the branch office of a UK party which, he says, imitates the Tories, not least over Brexit. He says that the SNP would seek to counter Labour's lurch to the right by pursuing progressive policies in a hung Westminster Parliament. In return, Mr Sawar suggests that Mr Yousaf, in reality, opts for a Tory government as a cover for his own incompetence. Cue mutual derision, cue voter disengagement. And the Tories at Westminster? They seem somewhat less than interested in Mr Ross's tactical voting. The Prime Minister's aim, rather, is to decry the prospect of coalition, hoping thereby to depict himself as a strong, focused leader. He told Sir Keir that, while he is busy plotting coalitions, we are getting on and delivering for the British people. Opinion polls in the English locals would suggest that the message is presently facing a degree of consumer resistance. And then the Liberal Democrats. They too registered a good showing in the council elections and are beginning to dream once more that they might help shape UK politics, that they might even re-enter UK government. Electoral politics in recent history would argue firmly against a revived Lib-Tory pact, which could mean Labour, hence the heckling from the Tory benches which greeted Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, this week. To repeat, we are not witnessing coalition manoeuvres. These are not prenuptial negotiations. Rather, each of the parties is seeking to shift the battleground to their own territory. This is raw politics, not altruism. And that political piece was by Brian Taylor. From the Herald Scotland, Saturday the 13th of May 2023, from the news section, exclusive. Dermal fillers home kit warning issued by Glasgow doctor. Article by Caroline Wilson. A leading Glasgow-based cosmetic doctor has issued a warning following a rise in a number of people injecting fillers and other anti-aging treatments at home using kits purchased online. Dr. Usman Qureshi said he was treating increasing numbers of men and women who had experienced serious complications including blocked arteries and abscesses. In one case, he said they helped a man who had injected his forehead with dermal fillers and the tissue had started to necrotise or die. Dr. Qureshi, who runs a clinic in Glasgow city centre, said that in some cases patients have been left with permanent scarring despite his efforts to reverse the damage. His practice charges upwards of £350 for fillers, while some websites are stocking kits for as little as £25. The Scottish Government announced last year that it plans further regulation of non-surgical cosmetic procedures, including dermal fillers, after acknowledging the serious health risks they carry. A public consultation found that 98% of respondents felt that non-surgical cosmetic procedures should be conducted by trained, qualified and regulated healthcare professionals. Clinics that provide treatments are regulated by Healthcare Improvement Scotland, HIS. However, there is no regulation on who can practice injectables in locations such as beauty salons, pharmacies, hairdressers and aesthetic clinics. Fillers are the most dangerous thing you can inject yourself, even more than Botox, said Dr. Qureshi. There are people who are buying dermal fillers on the internet and injecting it into themselves. They are buying kits and then looking up YouTube tutorials. In some cases you can fix it, but in others it causes permanent scarring. They're coming in with blocked vessels and abscesses. One guy who had injected filler into his forehead and it had resulted in a blocked artery, and it had started killing the skin around it. He approached a few practitioners who tried to improve it as much as they could, but there was damage. Another guy came in who wanted me to dissolve filler. Once I did it, he told me he had done it himself. He said people were able to purchase botulinum online, which requires a prescription and must only be administered by someone who is medically trained. He said others were buying PDO threads, which are inserted into the skin and used to stimulate collagen growth. They dissolve within the body over 4 to 6 months. Sometimes they put them in too superficially, said the doctor, who runs Look Skin in Ingham Street. It's not a dangerous thing, but it is unpleasant aesthetically. He said he had also treated people who had been to practitioners who trained on 2-day courses. He said, there are cases where they experience complications, but the practitioner is not able to resolve them. Sometimes there are jobs that haven't been done properly. Other times it is complications they can't correct or control. Experts say young people now view treatments such as Botox and fillers as a status symbol. Dr. Michael Prager, known as the King of Botox, said that while older patients sought a subtle approach when seeking anti-aging solutions, a visibly enhanced look had become popular with clients aged 30 and under. The clinician stated that younger people are being overly injected and proud of it, and, in many cases, had lost the plot. Dr. Qureshi said he had refused to treat patients, but said there would always be a willing practitioner somewhere else. He said, older people want to look better for their age, but the younger crowd want a more exaggerated or glamorous look. But they end up looking distorted. I think people just don't know when to stop. If one doctor refused to do more, they would just go and find someone else. And that report was an exclusive by Caroline Wilson. From the Herald Scotland, Saturday the 13th of May 2023, from the sports section, Rangers 3, Celtic 0. Instant reaction as Cantwell pulls Ibrox strings. Report by Matthew Lindsay. Victory in the final Old Firm game of the season, a match which had been dubbed the Dead Rubber Derby beforehand, will not make amends for finishing the season trophyless. But Rangers, who finally ended a 6-game winless run against Celtic at Ibrox this afternoon, thanks to first half goals from Todd Cantwell and John Souttar, and a Fashion Sakala strike in the second, enjoyed this 3-0 triumph, and then some all the same. They will be changing govern this summer, as manager Michael Beale embarks on what he has described as the biggest squad overhaul in years. But this comfortable and richly deserved victory eased the pressure on the Englishman, who lost 3 and drawn 1 of his first 4 meetings with the defending Scottish champions, considerably, and gave supporters hope that better times may lie ahead in the 2023-24 campaign and beyond. There was nothing other than pride at stake for Celtic, who retained the Scottish title with 4 games to spare last Sunday and did not field their strongest side, so they will not be overly despondent at the outcome. Not having any supporters in the 50,104 strong crowd, due to an ongoing dispute over ticket allocations and security protocols, gave their hosts a distinct advantage. Still, the loss meant that Ange Postecoglou's men cannot record a record points total of 107 in the league this term. The Greek-Australian coach, whose charges can complete their 5th treble in 7 years if they beat Inverness Caledonian Thistle in the Scottish Cup final at Hampden next month, will be eager to oversee an improvement in their next 3 league matches. Rangers edged in front in just the 5th minute when Joe Hart palmed a powerful John Lundstram attempt straight to the feet of Cantwell. The playmaker fired through the legs of the Celtic goalkeeper before jumping over the advertising hoarding to celebrate with his team's delirious fans. The visitors responded immediately. Rayo Hatati and Lial Abada linked well to supply Oh Hyun-gyu, and the striker hit the post. Celtic were soon dominating possession. They created a few half chances without greatly troubling Robin McCorry. Lundstram did well to block a Lial Abada shot. Their opponents made them pay for their lack of cutting edge in the final third in the 34th minute when Souttar outmuscled Yuki Kobayashi at a James Tavernier corner and bulleted home a header to open his account for Rangers. A mix-up involving Callum McGregor and Carl Starford after half-time enables Sakala to put the result beyond doubt. What does it mean long-term for Rangers? Should Celtic be concerned? Here are 5 talking points from events in Govan. Cantwell class. Cantwell has quickly become a darling of the Rangers' support since moving from Norwich City in January, and something of a hate figure for Celtic fans. His comments after the 3-2 defeat at Barricade last month, he took to Instagram to claim that Postecoglou's team didn't win it and argue that Beale's side lost the game, provoked quite a response from devotees of the Scottish champions. But the midfielder can walk the walk as well as talk the talk. He did well to break the deadlock early on, very nearly bagged a brace on a couple of occasions in the second half, performed with aggression, energy and invention throughout, and picked up the Man of the Match award at the final whistle. He promises to be a key player for Bale next term in this evidence. So sweet for Suter. The Scotland centre-half has endured a difficult time since joining Rangers on a free transfer from Hearts last summer. He spent 7 months out with an ankle injury after starting in the opening Premiership match against Livingston at Almondvale in July. The 26-year-old has, a misplaced patch against Celtic at Parkhead last month aside, impressed since returning to the fray in March. Scoring his first goal for the Ibrox club this afternoon was a sweet moment for him and will have increased his confidence further. The defender has a chance of winning a recall to the national squad for the Euro 2024 qualifiers against Norway and Cyprus next month if he maintains his current form. Rangers reserves. Beale made 2 changes to the starting lineup which is to edge at Aberdeen 6 days earlier. Suter replaced the injured Ben Davies at centre-half, while Ryan Jack came in for Yanis Hadji in central midfield. That meant that goalkeeper McCrory, left-back Ridvan Yilmaz and left-winger Rabi Matondo, a trio with limited experience of the world-famous fixture, retained their places. McCrory had kept a clean sheet in the game at the start of last season. Yilmaz and Matondo had both come off the bench in the second half of the Scottish Cup semi-final defeat at Hampden last month. Other than that though, they had not featured against Celtic. Would they rise to the occasion? McCrory did well to get off his line quickly and force O to shoot onto the post shortly after the opener, and then tip a Matt O'Reilly chip over his crossbar after half-time. Matondo was lively and direct and tested Hart with a couple of long-range pile drivers. Yilmaz gave Tony Ralston a torrid afternoon. Bale will strengthen his squad this summer. There will be up to a dozen players departing and as many coming in. But McCrory, Yilmaz and Matondo showed him this afternoon that they have much to offer going forward. Out of sorts Celtic, Postecoglou had admitted he was keen to give individuals who were not regular starters experience of what he described as a unique situation in his pre-match conference. He was probably eager to give a couple of players a bit of a rest as well. So Alexander Bernabei was preferred to Greg Taylor at left back, Liel Abada took over from Daizen Mieda out wide, and O was given the nod ahead of Kyogo Furuhashi. Celtic played well for long spells, but they were not quite the same force. Their manager will not be too perturbed, but he will have to address the failings at the back which allowed Rangers to score 3 goals. Nobody reacted quickly enough before Cantwell pounced for the first, Yuki Kobayashi was batted aside for the second, and the third was a comedy of errors, and sharpened things up in attack before the cup final. Big result for Beale. Beale was looking to avoid history, not make it today. No Rangers manager had lost 4 consecutive Old Firm games since Alan McLeish did so back in 2004. Furthermore, the 2003-04 and 2016-17 are the only seasons in which the Ibrox club have lost 5 times to their Parkhead rivals in a single campaign in major competitions. He was, then, hoping not to make it a hat-trick. Failure to pick up all 3 points, too, would have seen him join Graham Murty as the only man in his position who had failed to win his first 5 derbies in the modern era. But he got his team selection and tactics spot on and went an awfully long way towards silencing his doubters. And that article was by Matthew Lindsay.
Herald Scotland recorded on Monday 15th of May 2023. Arts and Entertainments. Bearsden Choir / Nun. City Halls Glasgow Review by Keith Bruce. Music. Bearsden Choir / Nun. City Halls Glasgow. Keith Bruce 4 stars. Saturday afternoon belonged to George Swan, it's safe to say, and not just because Mozart and Michael Tippett are no longer with us, nor because the young composer's peer group fan club were vociferously present at Glasgow City Halls. The Glasgow University graduate, a member of the choir and a product of Christopher Bell's National Youth Choir of Scotland music education system, is becoming an established composer and gave Bearsden a world premiere in his setting 19th century poet John Clare's Love Lives Beyond the Tomb. It may have been the shortest work in the programme, but it fitted the ensemble to which it is dedicated like a glove, every word of the text demanding the fullest attention in its meticulous verse-by-verse construction. The piece owes something to Vaughan Williams, but also to contemporary American composers Eric Whiteacre and Morton Lauridsen. Swan's wordless preface to the penultimate stanzas and Where's the Voice and hymn-like conclusion were beautifully executed by the choir. It was in the work's gospel-tinged piano accompaniment that echoes of Michael Tippett could be heard, who's a child of our time, opened the concert. Sung from memory by the choir, who have added their voices to a forthcoming John Birdcut film about the composer, this selection of extracts went beyond the arrangements of spirituals to give more sense of the whole work, with contributions from the four soloists, soprano Ellen Mawhinney, mezzo Lauren Young, tenor Jamie McDougall and baritone Andrew McTaggart. In what was Bearsden Choir's most original concert programme, the main work after the interval was the Mozart Requiem, performed with the four hands piano accompaniment, supplied by the St Magnus Festival partnership of Linda Cochrane and Judith Keeney, who had individually supplied the piano for Tippett, brackets Cochrane, close brackets, and the Swan, brackets Keeney, close brackets. Choir director Andrew Nunn has unarguably taken the Bearsden chorus to a new level of performance in recent years, and this recital was another milestone in that progression. Perhaps the singers could, in fact, have handled slightly brisker tempi in the Mozart, although the pause the conductor took before the Lacrimosa set up their most poised singing. That quartet of soloists complemented the choir by finding an ensemble approach that clearly owed plenty to their collective opera experience. By Keith Bruce.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 15th of May 2023, from the politics section, Alistair Jack should resign if he can't stand up to James Cleverly. This article is an exclusive by Kathleen Nutt. Alistair Jack should resign if he can't stand up to James Cleverly over Scotland taking part in overseas work without the permission of the UK government, according to a former Labour First Minister. Henry McLeish called for the Scottish Secretary to consider his position if he couldn't persuade the Foreign Secretary to withdraw new guidance sent to UK diplomatic missions, which seeks to place new conditions on Scottish ministers on their international work. The guidance, which has prompted new tensions between London and Edinburgh, tells UK diplomats that meetings between overseas ministers and the Scottish Government should be arranged through the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Mr Cleverly called for a strengthened approach to Scottish ministerial visits, ensuring officials from the UK Government are present during meetings with foreign governments, saying that they were concerned that the Scottish Government was promoting separatism during meetings with overseas officials and ministers and undermining UK Government policy. Days after the Foreign Secretary's letter emerged, the Tory peer Lord Frost called for Holyrood's powers to be stripped back. As Scotland Office Minister Mr McLeish steered the Scotland Act in 1998 through the Commons, working under the then Scottish Secretary Donald Dewar in the late 1990s. The legislation determined the original powers of the Scottish Parliament. He said the devolution settlement allowed Scottish ministers to carry out work in international affairs, for instance to promote the country's trade, culture, tourism and education, though issues such as signing international treaties and decisions to go to war were reserved for Westminster. He said Mr Cleverly's letter was a mistake and suggested he did not understand the devolution settlement which he and Mr Dewar had helped create. This letter, by James Cleverly, is part of a wider assault on devolution, said the former First Minister. It's the contempt, the disrespect, but it's also about political control and coercion. This Tory government does not recognise the spirit of devolution, and, to me, Cleverly was ill-advised to write this. He has not got constitutional powers to do so. Donald Dewar and I knew that Scotland can become involved in international relations, so my advice to the Foreign Secretary is to withdraw the letter, because it has no meaning, and secondly, if he doesn't withdraw it, then I would advise the Scottish Government and the Parliament to ignore the sentiments in it. He added, the other point is, this is the Secretary of State has a role here. The Secretary of State is supposed to represent Scotland's interest in the UK Conservative government. He is not doing that, and what he looks like is a willing ally of Westminster in trying to undermine devolution. My advice to him is to acknowledge that Cleverly's letter was a mistake, and if he doesn't, then the Secretary of State for Scotland should consider his position. Scotland's Secretary of State role is to look after the interests of Scotland, not to look after the interests of the Tory party. Earlier this month, Angus Robertson, the Cabinet Secretary on External Relations, demanded the Foreign Secretary to withdraw the guidance issued in the letter, accusing him of penning a misleading document which damages Scotland's interests. Mr McLeish was Scotland's second First Minister from 2000 to 2001 and an early advocate of the country's work overseas. He pointed to Holyrood as taking part in its early days in Tartan Day celebrations in the United States, and that he established a presence of a First Secretary for Scotland in the UK's embassy in Washington. Mr McLeish visited Washington DC in April 2001 and met with the US President George W. Bush for 40 minutes in the White House's Oval Office. Donald and I had the view there was nothing stopping Scotland from operating on the world stage, the former First Minister told the Herald. We had historical relations with the United States because of the diaspora, and in 1998 the US Senate passed a motion declaring Tartan Day every year on April the 6th. I was determined we would start to impact on the global stage in a modest way. He went on to say that following the UK's withdrawal from the European Union, it was even more important for the Scottish Government to enhance Scotland's relations with other countries across the world. This is not about independence, this is about Scotland, the nation, being able to build links with Europe for a variety of reasons. For education, business, tourism, culture, our diaspora, climate change, science and technology. We have an absolute democratic right to be doing all of that. Post-Brexit, we have to make sure that our links with Europe are not lost. And my contention is that the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament should be doing more in Europe and internationally, generally, to try and make up for the UK Government losing respect in the world. Mr McLeish said he would like to see the Scottish Government open more hubs in European cities, as well as other countries, and also called for the SNP ministers to establish a Council on Overseas Relations, allowing the country to deepen its international expertise. In addition, he also called for more work to be done to forge links between Scotland and its million-strong overseas diaspora. A UK government spokeswoman said, "Any suggestion that the UK government is suppressing Scotland's voice from being heard internationally is absurd. The 800 staff based at FCDO's joint HQ in East Kilbride are at the very heart of shaping and delivering UK foreign policy. The Scottish Government's Constitution and External Affairs Secretary, Angus Robertson, recently praised the FCDO at the Scottish Affairs Committee for its strong record of supporting the devolved governments, promoting every area of the UK as part of our DNA. The Foreign Secretary's guidance will not change the UK Government's commitment to working collaboratively with each of the devolved governments and their ministers in the delivery of devolved policy objectives, while ensuring reserved competencies are fully respected." And that article was an exclusive by Kathleen Nutt.
This article is from the Herald on Monday, the 15th of May 2023. The headline is Joanna Cherry, One Step Forward, One Step Back, and the report is by Mark Smith. Question: can someone like Joanna Cherry be cancelled? Are her opinions being suppressed when she's appearing in public all the time talking about her opinions being suppressed? Is she really being silenced when she's talking so much? Will these questions never end? Who can say? Miss Cherry herself has been pretty definitive on the matter, as everyone in the world knows by now, because there's been lots of free speech about it. The MP was due to appear at a fringe event before it was cancelled because staff at the Strand said they were uncomfortable with her views on transgender issues. Miss Cherry said she'd been no platformed because she's a lesbian with the gender-critical view that sex is immutable. The response of those who supported the cancellation was that Miss Cherry hadn't been no platformed at all. She has a right to free speech, they said, and has plenty of platforms on which to practice it. But she doesn't have the right to make other people listen to those views or help disseminate them. The problem was that Miss Cherry is a lawyer and knows her stuff, and in particular knows that gender-critical views such as hers are protected under the Equality Act, meaning cancelling her event on the basis of such opinions was probably illegal. Once the Stand had spoken to lawyers who agreed with the MP, the club said they'd been guilty of unlawful discrimination, apologised and said the event would now go ahead. Miss Cherry's response was that she hoped the club's decision would benefit other people by discouraging similar discrimination in the future. But I'm not so sure. Last year I listened to Miss Cherry give a speech at Holyrood about the SNP's self-ID law, in which she said that when rights conflict we need to have a civilised discussion about how to rub along. Quite right. But I'm worried the people who need to put in the hard work to make that happen aren't doing it, and we're taking one step forward and one step back. We're progressing, maybe, but not very far and not very fast. Let me give you an example. A couple of weeks ago I was due to attend a screening at Edinburgh University of a film called Adult Human Female. You've probably heard about it. It's the film that explores the gender-critical views of Miss Cherry and others, and it's controversial because some people consider it hateful and transphobic. The first attempted screening of the film last year was cancelled after protests, so I knew things were likely to kick off at the second attempt. And they did. The doors to the lecture theatre were blocked by activists, faces hidden behind masks and glasses, and at one point an extremely plucky octogenarian called Flora Brodie attempted to storm past the protesters and get into the building. I spoke to Miss Brodie, and she was a fine example of the genre of redoubtable Edinburgh lady. "Why is the film hateful?" she told me. "There is nothing hateful about saying that a man has a penis and a woman has ovaries and a womb. The problem, and I watched it happen, was that the stewards appeared to be more concerned about the actions of the people who wanted to see the film than the actions of the protesters attempting to shut it down. Several of the stewards blocked Miss Brodie from going any further, but did nothing to clear the entrances to the building. Perhaps they were worried about public safety and the possible risk of violence. But if there is such a risk, the university authorities have a duty to face it and put measures in place, with the police if necessary, to ensure that they have control over their own campus. This is where my point about certain people needing to put in the hard work really kicks in. When some of the staff at the Stand said they weren't prepared to work on Joanna Cherry's event, the management should have taken a firm stance right away. The same applies to other venues that have caved in a similar way. Perhaps the staff could have been offered alternative shifts, but they certainly should have been told that they cannot dictate who appears in the venue. Ultimately, if they don't like it, they could leave or be sacked. I appreciate that this is not an easy thing for management to do, particularly if they're middle-aged, which they tend to be, and manage a comedy club and want to keep in with the cool views of the younger people who tend to be the ones checking the tickets and pouring the pints during the interval. It's also easier just to go along with those who kick up a fuss because people think it makes for a quiet life, except that it doesn't, because Joanna Cherry is not the quiet type, thankfully. So fixing this situation and ensuring the right to free speech can be freely exercised, even by people whose views you don't like, is going to require some robustness from the people who run comedy clubs, public venues, lecture theatres and so on, even though managerial robustness is not very fashionable. There is a type of manager common in comedy clubs and universities, I'm sure, that eschews telling people what to do for fear of appearing bossy, dictatorial, or, God forbid, conservative. But you know what? They are just going to have to get on with it. This is especially so at Edinburgh University and every other university. The women who are trying to stage the screening of Adult Human Female are due to have a meeting with the university management this week, but they are not hopeful progress is being made. The management are certainly talking a good game and say they are committed to upholding freedom of expression, but we do not even know yet if they are willing to support another screening of the film, and if they are, what they will do to ensure it happens. I suspect, as the managers of the Stand may also do, that the university authorities hope the gender-critical feminists with their pesky films and their pesky opinions will just go away and give them a quiet life. And in some ways, I get that. I would hate to be the one trying to solve this situation because it's not going to be easy. I spoke to some of the protesters at the aborted screening of Adult Human Female, and they're clearly prepared to do it again. The thing is, though, the people who run our public spaces must meet the protesters' determination with determination of their own. It's going to be difficult, and it could get worse, but that's just how it is sometimes. An easy life isn't always the best route to the truth, and the right thing to do is often the most difficult. That report was by Mark Smith. This article is from the Herald on Monday the 15th of May 2023. It is from the opinion section and the headline is SNP Scottish Universities No Tuition Fees Policy Key, and the report is by Ian McConnell. The issue of free university tuition has been very much in the headlines again in the last week. It was thrust into the limelight on May the 2nd with the revelation from Sir Keir Starmer that he was planning to go back on a pledge he made during his 2020 Labour leadership campaign to support the abolition of tuition fees in England. University of Edinburgh Principal and Vice-Chancellor Professor Sir Peter Matheson waded into the debate on tuition fees in a Scottish context with an article published in the Herald on Wednesday, in which he declared that allowing wealthier families to pay for places could help prevent talent and money leaving the country. He said that this idea and asking graduates above the average income to repay fees were worthy of calm consideration. His ideas prompted a swift and categoric response from the recently installed First Minister, Humza Yousaf. Sir Keir asked about his 2020 Labour leadership campaign pledge on tuition fees during an interview on BBC Radio 4's Today programme on May the 2nd, replied, "We are likely to move on from that commitment because we do find ourselves in a different financial situation." He added there were other ways of approaching this, declaring that his party could not ignore the current economic situation ahead of the next election. I observed in my column in the Herald on Wednesday that it was difficult to overstate how demoralising it was to hear about this U-turn, and it is most definitely a U-turn rather than a moving on. It is difficult to see why on earth access to higher education and a far greater range of jobs and better earning potential should be limited to or skewed towards those with the deepest pockets. The column argued that access must surely be based on merit, thus helping societies and economies thrive. And it posed two big questions. Why on earth would you choose to narrow the talent pool? And why should the richest, the real elites, as opposed to the Brexiters' use of this word to describe people who think for themselves and oppose populism, have their pick of the top universities because others are excluded? The SNP administration at Holyrood has remained committed to free tuition for students living in Scotland who are undertaking first degrees at Scottish universities. This is a stance supported by the SNP's junior partners at Holyrood, the Scottish Greens. It is an exemplary stance which surely benefits the economy, and it would be good to see it replicated throughout the UK. The chances of such progress have, however, sadly been dashed by Sir Keir's latest volte-face. Sir Keir seems to have been developing a habit of U-turning on key issues with major implications for the economy. He has already U-turned completely on Brexit, ruling out rejoining the European single market and customs union. His U-turning seems likely to dash or at least dilute significantly the hopes of some that if he were to come to power at the next general election, there might be some significant improvement in the UK's economic performance. The economy has performed very poorly under the Conservatives since 2010, with austerity weighing heavily and Brexit dealing the country another extremely heavy blow, one which will most certainly be ongoing. My column in the Herald on Friday lamented the latest re-announcement of the Australia and New Zealand trade deals by the UK government earlier this month. highlighting the tiny net benefits of these agreements and how these paled into insignificance relative to the economic losses arising from Brexit. It would surely be nice to see divergence rather than convergence between Sir Keir and the Tories on key policies, including Brexit and free university tuition, as well as the likes of taxation. Right now, on various fronts, it seems difficult to put a cigarette paper between Labour and the Conservatives. On tuition fees in Scotland, Sir Peter Matheson declared the government funding received for Scottish students was inadequate and has led to a situation where fee payers from the UK and overseas were subsidising the system while wealthier students were going to English universities because of the squeeze on places north of the border. The overall funding of universities is undoubtedly a complex and controversial issue. However, in a UK-wide context, a Prime Minister can easily make spending and taxation choices which ensure university tuition is free for the country's citizens who are undertaking their first degree. Other European countries, taking Sweden and Finland as just a couple of examples, have no problem in making university tuition free for their citizens. And it was a relief to hear Mr Yousaf reiterate the Scottish Government's commitment to free university tuition for people living in Scotland, following the interventions of Sir Peter and Sir Keir. Responding to Sir Peter's comments, Mr Yousaf said, "I don't agree." He added, "I have a lot of time for the principal of Edinburgh University, but I believe that education, university education in particular, should be based on the ability to learn, not the ability to pay. There will be no movement at all from the Scottish Government in relation to free tuition." These words should be music to the ears of anyone who desires what is best for Scotland from both economic and societal perspectives. And it would be good indeed to see Scotland's eminently sensible stance on free university tuition adopted throughout the UK, with public funding made available as appropriate to make this happen. This article was by Ian McConnell.
This article is from the Herald on the 16th of May 2023, from the sports section. The headline is Challenge Cup. Carolan urges Glasgow Warriors to stick to the script. The report is by Stuart Bathgate. Stick to the script and do not get carried away by the occasion. That will be the message from the Glasgow coaching team to the playing squad on Friday night when they take on Toulon in the Challenge Cup final. Of course, should the Warriors win the tie at Dublin's Aviva Stadium, the first European final the team have been involved in, the players will go down in history, just like the team that won the Pro 12 final back in 2015. But Gregor Townsend recalled at the weekend that his Glasgow side lost the final the year before that triumph because they had been caught up in the magnitude of the match, and the Scotland coach's successors at Scotstoun are determined not to make the same mistake this time. For us, it's more about playing the game than the occasion, assistant coach Nigel Carolan said yesterday. It's a big game, but if we go off script and forget what we're good at, we could be in trouble. We just don't want to get loose against Toulon, who are a team who thrive on chaos. We're very much a team who are orderly. We have processes planned for almost every facet of our game, and it's about executing them as accurately as possible. After saying there were no new fitness concerns in the squad, Carolan suggested that either of the team's available recognised standoffs, Domingo Miotti or Duncan Weir, would start at number 10 in the absence of the suspended Tom Jordan, who would have been the front-runner to take the berth. Centre Stafford McDowell, slotted in at standoff after Jordan was sent off in the URC quarter-final defeat by Munster earlier this month. But his lack of experience in the playmaking position appears to have ruled him out of contention. Carlin declined to say whether Miotti or Weir would be in the starting lineup, but the more he analysed their competing claims, the more it began to sound likely that the Argentinian would be preferred to the Scot, with Miotti's performance in the earlier away win against Munster having been particularly persuasive. One of our more established tens will probably be the plan, he explained. We'll see how Duncan and Domingo go at the start of the week, then decide which of them will start. It's difficult not to have Stafford involved in some capacity. He's been a great and consistent performer for us. Either way, both Domingo and Duncan have been training really well. Duncan is an established game-managing 10. He's got a pretty sound kicking game. Domingo has a little more flair and is very much a confidence player. When his confidence is up, he does some really magical things. The challenge is to have players around him to get the best out of him if we do decide to select him. We think that the Munster win shows he can handle the big occasion. When he's got really good and established players around him, it brings out the best in him. Duncan is a little more conservative, plays more back in the pocket. He's a good kicking game, but generally we are a team who try to break sides down with ball in hand. Most of our kicks are on the front foot. We don't generally kick off 10. If we do select Duncan, it does change to some degree some of the things we do. Toulon also have two standoffs who are competing for the jersey. Welsh international Dan Biggar and New Zealand Aiea West, and Carlin believes the former will get the nod. I think Dan Biggar will start. He is there for these kinds of big games, and we know it's all about Dan. He wants a lot of the focus and limelight on him. He'll want a lot of the play to go through him in terms of both kicking and running the ball. So we expect a lot of kicks from him, high balls in behind to challenge our back three. But whichever one they select is not really a massive focus for us. West was at 10 in the side that lost 43-7 at Racing 92 on Saturday night. But Carlin is not reading too much into that result, given Toulon fielded a significantly weakened lineup. I think they had more of a second team out. Our homework was done more on the side which played against La Rochelle the week before and Lyon the week before that as well. So, we won't take too much notice of what happened at the weekend, and most of our focus is generally on ourselves. We know the threats that they bring. They're a physical team with a big set piece. They decimated Benetton in the Challenge Cup semi-final when the weather was poor, but a dry track at the Aviva with the weather expected to be good will be a different proposition. So, we'll pray that the gods are on our side from that point of view. That report was by Stuart Bathgate. This article is from the Herald on the 16th of May 2023 from the sports section. The headline is, the day Celtic icon Kyogo tormented Ange's team with brilliant display. The report is by Liam Bryce. It didn't take long for Ange Postecoglou to conclude that Kyogo Furuhashi was the real deal. But from laying eyes on this diminutive striker, who had only just stepped up from the second tier of Japanese football, he could scarcely have imagined the journey they would one day embark upon halfway across the world. Postecoglou was alerted to Kyogo's presence by the fact that his Yokohama F. Marinos defenders could not keep track of him. The Celtic manager refused to take his eye off him after that, and when he upped sticks for Glasgow in the summer of 2021, he already knew who his first signing would be. 4 trophies and 50 goals later, things haven't worked out too badly. Both men were recognised at Sunday's PFA Scotland Awards, walking away as Manager of the Year and Player of the Year. He was an opponent, Postecoglou recalled. We were playing in his country. I was coaching at Yokohama, and he had just been signed from a second division club, Gifu, by Vissel Kobe. It was his first year in. He scored in his first game against us, and we were on a decent run at the time. I remember our defenders saying he was just unbelievable. They couldn't track his movement. I have followed him ever since then. Every game he played, whether we were playing against him or not. I could see he was just growing as a footballer all the time. I was sure he'd be a success. Look, it's easy for me to say now, but he was the first person that I wanted to sign. To be fair, wherever I got a job here in Europe, he would have been the first player I signed, irrespective of the level I was managing at, because I knew the qualities he has as a footballer are hard to find. He scores goals, which is kind of obvious, but his work rate, his intelligence on the field, the kind of person he is, I had no doubt he would be a hit wherever I took him. But when I landed him at Celtic, I thought he was a perfect fit for the club and the way I wanted to play football. He just fits in perfectly. It's great to see him get the recognition. You could see it when he spoke. He was as humble as he always is. The beauty of that is that you know there is still more to come from him. He has been outstanding for us in the last couple of years. To come to a new club, a new country, where the expectations are so big, and to fill some pretty big shoes, because the last few strikers at Celtic have gone on to pretty big things. He has taken that mantle seriously. He's right in that Celtic have been blessed with a conveyor belt of talisman over recent seasons. Kyogo stepped into the void left by Odsonne Edouard, who himself had taken over from Moussa Dembele. Both had been heroes to the Celtic support, so there was no shortage of pressure on the new arrival to emulate that at a time when the new icons were desperately needed. He has been great, said Postecoglou. If you look at his goals per game ratio, it is up there. People forget that he missed a fair bit through injury last year. This year, I tend to take him off after 60 or 70 minutes, only because I want him to play in every game. If I kept him on for 90 minutes when opposition teams are tiring, he would probably have another 10 or 15 goals under his belt. Like I said, he works really hard for the team. He does what he needs to do. He has just got that uncanny sense of knowing when to be when the ball arrives in the box. Of his 30 goals this season, however, none were registered in Celtic's Champions League campaign. Postecoglou's long-term aim has been to make the club competitive on the continent once more, and having been confirmed as Premiership champions for the second season running, they will get another crack at Europe's best come next season. It was evident that Celtic's lack of clinical edge proved costly in this term's group stage, and there was a real sense of what if around 2 matches against Shakhtar Donetsk in particular, which were strewn with missed opportunities. Postecoglou believes Kyogo may just feel he has unfinished business in that regard. Yeah, absolutely, the manager said. He's constantly challenging himself. I have said before, he's got a real pleasant nature about him. He's constantly smiling. But he is a competitor. He wants to win. He wants to be the best. He wants to score goals in every game he plays. I see that every day in training. His teammates know that. He has got a real hunger and desire to be the best striker he can be. I still think there is a lot of improvement in him. Given their success over the past year, it is inevitable that there will be some noise around Celtic's best when the transfer window opens. Postecoglou himself has previously prepared fans for the distinct possibility that there may be the odd heartbreak amid the overarching goal of driving the club on to a higher level, which will involve cashing in on certain players when the time and the money is right. The prospect of richer clubs muscling in to court his top stars doesn't appear to keep the manager awake at night, though, and he emphasised his confidence that Kyogo remains happy and settled in his current surroundings, something he hopes continues for years to come. As confident as I am about keeping any other player, Postecoglou said of the likelihood of retaining his top scorer. You always want to keep every player, but I have been involved in this game for so long that I know that's not how football works. You prepare to keep everyone, you prepare to lose everyone. All you can try and do is make sure that the players are in a good space, are happy, are improving, and that they are enjoying their football. That is all you can do. You can't chain them down. It's their football careers, their lives. They have to make decisions on. What I do know is he's really happy at the football club. He loves playing for the football club. He loves the supporters. He loves his teammates. Hopefully, he is here for a very long time. That article was by Liam Bryce.
That concludes this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels, review, tell your friends about our service.